Peter FitzSimons, thank you so much for coming to Booktopia and signing your brand new book, The Battle of Long Tan.
Thank you for having me. I'm having a lovely time.
And we didn't even force him to say that.
I love doing this. I could do this till midnight.
Oh,
I really could. I once broke the world record for longest interview. Went for 24 hours with Richard Glover. I reckon I could do the world record for signing books.
Well, maybe this might be the book to do it. Could you let us know, why did you decide to write this book? Why The Battle of Long Tan? Why now?
Because my reading audience, public, my readers, seem to react very well to whenever I do military stuff, and people have long said to me I should do Vietnam. And like a lot of my books, when I start out, I don't know a lot about it. And the best thing is when you start to inquire into something and you go, wow, they did what? What? How did that happen? And for me with Long Tan, once I started working out what happened and all the angles that I could reveal, I guess, and fresh paths of information and wonderful people to talk to, and I love, basically every time I talk to old soldiers, it's always a privilege. They've always got a story to tell, and with Delta Company and 6RAR, I talk to a lot of them, and they're extraordinary people, together with the chopper pilots that help save them. And I think the chopper angle on Long Tan is the one that's underdone. And Long Tan, also Little Patty and Cole Joy, who were singing at the base at Nui Dat when Long Tan breaks out 5 kilometres away. And Little Patty, 17 years old, and she's singing, "My Wompy Stompy Surfer Boy," boom, boom, and she's looking around and she's watching the audience, and they're not really reacting, and so she thinks, keep singing "My Wompy Stompy Surfer Boy." They're not reacting. Oh, they're reacting. They're getting up, they're moving, and off stage they go, "Get off, get off." I mean, it's an amazing story.
And did you find with this book, because it's more of a recent history book, that you were able to sort of dig even deeper than you would have been previously, because you got to speak to so many more people that were involved?
That is the privilege. I mean, right now I'm doing the last charge of Beersheba, and myself and my researchers going through diaries, letters, and official histories, trying to work out what happened. But in this one, there's a particular bloke called Dave Savin, who I think is the absolute world expert. Beat 'em all. He was there in command of one of the platoons, and he since the time of Long Tan, he's studied it. You know, there's been a lot of guys. A few times when in my book on Tobruk, some of the guys who were at Tobruk were nice and said after reading my book they knew what was happening around them, because at the time they're just firing at the Germans, Rommel's Afrika Korps, and they read the book, you get the whole context. But in the case of Dave Savin, he was not only there fighting in the middle of the whole thing, but afterwards he read everything there was, and he sort of collated it, and he drew maps, and he totally understood it. So for me, any time I got lost, I would call Dave, did many interviews with him, and then he would put me in touch with other people, and it was, or if he couldn't read, on the off chance that he couldn't answer it himself, but it was fantastic to be talking to somebody who was there at the time.
I bet there is so much more in this book that is going to appeal to both history buffs and military buffs.
I guess the other angle for me is Vietnam. What were we doing there in the first place? I mean, and that too is an extraordinary story, where part of the thing, if I'm not overdoing my time,
no, keep going, please.
JFK, John F. Kennedy, presided over the first American soldiers that went into Vietnam, and then he went to Paris, I think it was 1962, with his wife Jackie. The famous line where he said, "I'll be known as the man that accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris." And while he's there, de Gaulle, President Charles de Gaulle, takes him aside and says to him, "Monsieur le Président, il faut pas aller au Indochine." Mr. President, if I can just give you a word of advice, do not get involved in a war in Indochina. We have been there, you ain't going to win. Then not long afterwards, he's back in Washington DC, and his former commander in the Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur, asked to have a word with him, and comes to see him in the Oval Office. "Yes, General." And he says, "One thing, whatever happens, do not get involved in a war in Indochina. You will not win it." And, you know, he spoke from great experience. And then, of course, Kennedy was shot, LBJ took over, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and those warnings were lost in the wash, and they went into Vietnam. And in many ways, well, it was a war they just could never win. And the Australians, you know, basically the Australians had to beg for the Americans to ask them to go, beg the Vietnamese to ask them to go, you know, and that's another side angle. But it was basically under the policy of all the way with LBJ. We just kept committing more and more men, and I found that side of the story fascinating.
And do you find that there's lessons for now that you can take out of this book that you sort of learnt while you were researching?
Yes, I guess the lesson comes from a lot of them that I see in a lot of my books is Australian forces have to be under the command of Australian politicians and Australian generals, Australian colonels, Australian majors. Our worst disasters have come. I mean, I speak particularly of the Battle of Fromelles, which is the one that makes me the angriest, which I did a few books ago, where 7,500 Australians, this is 19.3 carry 1 subtract 2, 1916, 7,000 Australian soldiers go forward under insane British orders, and in 14 hours, 5,500 casualties, 1,900 men dead. And I guess one theme that runs through a lot of my books is precisely that. We have to be running our own show, and not only in terms of the Republic, don't get me started, but in terms of military as well.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for answering those questions for us. And if you would like to read more about the Battle of Long Tan and why we were there and what we were doing there and what happened, you can get a copy signed, if you are lucky and fast, from booktopia.com.au. Peter FitzSimons, thanks for your time.
Thank you.